Ithaca presents War and Peace and War, 20 Years in Afghanistan, written and read by me, Andrew North. For my family always, and the women of Afghanistan who never pick their fight. Prologue. You are our guest. A Taliban guard, I could only sense, steered me into a room I couldn't see. I'd been wearing a hat against the winter cold, and he'd turned it into a blindfold, pulling it down hard over my eyes. After manoeuvring me inside, he pushed me into a seat. From my left, the way I'd come in, I heard the sound of the guard leaving and closing the door. The room smelt stale and airless. For a moment I thought I was alone. But then, from my right, came the unmistakable metallic clicks of a gun being loaded and charged. I froze, too scared even to breathe. It was early February 2022, 3 days since a Taliban patrol had stopped my driver and me in the Afghan capital, Kabul. At first, we thought it was a routine security check, but it had turned into an abduction. They chained me up in their base overnight, and next day drove us blindfolded to a prison complex somewhere in Kabul, where we were locked into basement cells. It was 20 years since I'd first set foot in Afghanistan, and everything had turned full circle. When I first arrived, the Taliban had just been overthrown by the United States and its allies. I'd been sent there to report on the country's early efforts to form a new government and rebuild. Over the ensuing decades, I returned again and again, living there for several years and getting to know Afghans from many different walks of life. In that early period, Afghanistan was a place electric with promise, where many people believed that their fortunes were finally turning after nearly a quarter of a century of war. Much of their history has been defined by conflict and determined resistance to invaders, but like so many previous visitors, I was struck by the hospitality and warmth I encountered almost everywhere. Aside from the Taliban, most people seemed to want to give the latest foreign force on their soil a chance, offering a welcome rather than a new war. In early 2002, it was impossible to imagine that 2 decades later, this US-led army would be reeling from defeat, and that the Taliban would have been replaced by the Taliban. There was silence for several seconds after I'd heard the gun being loaded. Then I heard a voice tell me to take off my hat, in English. Sitting behind a desk was a powerfully built man, wearing a black skullcap and a bulky camouflage jacket, which made him look even larger. He had a white patch on one shoulder, bearing the Arabic words Allahu Akbar. Footnote: Allahu Akbar means God is most great, and it's an Arabic phrase known as the takbir, used by all Muslims in prayers and other situations. The Taliban have long used the takbir in their official insignia. "Don't worry," the Talib chuckled. "There are no bullets." I forced a smile as he ejected the magazine and put the weapon on the desk. "Tell me what kind of gun this is," he continued. I know it's a handgun," I said, "but I don't know what kind." "You're lying," he said, shaking his head. I felt utterly helpless and very aware of the precious liberty I had lost. By then, I knew that the man interrogating and taunting me worked for the Taliban's intelligence department. My Afghan cellmates had informed me that we were being held in the basement prison at their headquarters. But why? It was my 3rd trip back since the Taliban's takeover. I'd been all over the country on those previous visits without trouble, writing about the early stages of their return to power. On this trip, I was due to travel with 3 colleagues to one of the areas most affected by the recent conflict, to cover the worsening humanitarian situation there. But just before I arrived in Kabul, my colleagues were detained. One of them was my driver's brother. We were trying to find out what had happened to them when we were taken as well. Was it a sign of the Taliban resorting to one of their old tactics, kidnapping people to use them as bargaining material? Westerners had been a frequent target in the past, and I was deeply conscious
Sample complete. Ready to continue?